have supported me by subscribing to my podcast. And for all those who haven't, look down below and click that button. I do appreciate your support. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Confidential Conversations. I am Shannon, your host, and I am so excited to bring you my favorite segment of this show is Forensic Friday. I cannot think of a better way to kick off 2023 than with my next guest, Larry Renner. Larry is a crime scene investigator. He also is a bloodstain pattern analyst. He has worked on so many different cases, programs. His history, his work history is incredible, but I'll let him explain all that. He also has created a crime scene investigation college course. This man is incredible, and I cannot wait to get into questions with him. Please, if you have any for him, he's going to be a return guest. You can send all of those questions to shannonconfidential007@gmail.com. But I cannot wait to bring you our very first Forensic Friday guest for 2023, Larry Renner. And here he is, Larry Renner, the gentleman I just told you about. I cannot wait to dive into this man's brain. But until then, Larry, thank you so much for being our first Forensic Friday guest for 2023. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Larry, tell us all about what brought you to Forensic Friday today.
Yeah. Well, I have a bachelor's in biology. I have a master's in biology, and I have a PA in pathology. I'm a physician's assistant. Okay. And I am not one of those people that when I was 3 years old said, I want to be a forensic scientist. It's just sort of developed along the way. When I was in high school, I worked for a funeral company locally there in northeastern Ohio. And at that time, the funeral homes ran the ambulances.
Wow.
So I started out as an ambulance attendant. My first ambulance case was a DOA. We got him there alive, but he died about 3 days later. I won't go into any gruesome details, but it was an accidental explosion sort of thing. I taught high school for 4 years in the sciences. I taught a basic introduction to biology, and then I had an advanced biology class, which was more like an anatomy physiology class for students who were going on into college and wanted more background. I finished off my master's, and I was working on that while I was teaching high school. Taught in Florida, Sarasota, Florida, for 4 years. That's where I met my wife. She was also a teacher. Finished my master's, and my master's was done on a NSF grant, National Science Foundation. Okay. And then I applied for another one for Birmingham, Alabama, the University of Alabama, for physician's assistants training. It was a 2-year program. I completed it in a year, and then I was the assistant director of the program for 2 years after that.
Wow.
So I'd applied to New Mexico. The county coroner system, the state legislatures had done away with in the new law. Our law is going into effect July 1st. So July 1st of 1973, the state medical examiner's office went into existence. We were one of the first states to have a statewide medical examiner program.
That's
so
fantastic.
I moved in the middle of July. They gave me 2 weeks to get settled, get an apartment, and I started working. I was working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. My pathologist that I worked under was nice enough when I first started to give me 1 weekend off a month. And I was paid on a per case basis. So it's like a funeral home. Nobody dies. I didn't make any money.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird wish though, right? You want to make money and be successful, but
after 7.5 years, I'd done a number of scenes. As a deputy medical investigator in New Mexico, the body, a dead body, any sudden, unexpected, unattended, or traumatic death cannot be moved, examined, anything until the medical examiner's office has released it. So anytime you get a homicide, car crash, anything, if there's a known dead body, the cops can't even go in and look for a driver's license for identification until the medical examiner's office approves that. By the time that history was over, I was certified as a senior crime scene analyst through the International Association for Identification.
Okay.
I was the 11th person in the world to become certified as a bloodstain pattern examiner. And I was a crime scene reconstructionist. Bloodstain pattern examinations are just a specialized form of crime scene reconstruction. The bloodstains will tell you a lot, but then there's a lot of things that fingerprints or shoe prints or tire print, to put the whole case together.
Yeah.
It's often more than just blood. So,
We'll
and
get
I enjoy
into that later, I promise you.
We had a shift in the administration at the state police, and they were trying to save money. So they had a meeting with the lab director, wanted to know, why are we paying all these eggheads in the crime laboratory all this overtime money? And he said, well, we go to court all over the state, which is usually a day or two, 3, 4. Says, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about that. Says, but that still seems like a lot of money. Says, well, we also do crime scenes. Any agency in the state that needs assistant with the crime scene, we'll send out 2 analysts. We have photographic equipment. We have, experience. We have lasers, all kinds of things that you can use at a crime scene. We have little departments in New Mexico with 2 or 3 man police department. They might get a homicide once every 10 years.
Yeah.
So she said, well, we can certainly do something about that. They stopped the crime lab doing any crime scenes. And I thought that was criminal right there. So I had a
I
friend.
don't even understand the logic of that.
No, well, it's dollars. But I finally retired. I've been doing private consulting work. At that stage, maybe 30 years. And the consulting business was getting heavier, busier. And the city police work was busy. But when I worked with the city, we'd get maybe 5 or 6 homicides in a year. So it's really a very safe place to live. So I retired and I've been retired now 18, 19 years, just doing private consulting. And I've testified in court. I've done a lot more cases than I've testified, but I've testified in Alaska, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Tennessee, North Carolina. I've covered 14 different states, and I may not have remembered all 14 in my little scenario right there. But I still enjoy doing crime scenes. I enjoy working with the puzzle of a crime. I teach my class.
That's what I call it, the puzzle. People always say, why are you into this so much? Why did you want to get into forensics? It's the puzzle.
It's the puzzle, exactly. I teach, I've taught at Santa Fe Community College and Northern New Mexico College. I've been doing that for 20, 22 years. I have a basic forensic investigation class that I teach, which I originally put together when I was with the state police. So many of our officers did not get the training in the academy that would help them, particularly with crime scenes. So I put together a 16-chapter book and teach that as my basic class. When I first started out, I'd get 4 or 5 civilians in there, and most of them were law enforcement. The last few years, I've been getting 1 or 2 law enforcement. Everybody else is civilian. But I think it's a fun class. I also do an advanced class, which is a crime scene reconstruction course, which is primarily hands-on. The basic class, I have lots of slides, and we cover the 16 chapters that I cover: crime scene processing, disaster handling, question documents, medical examiner system, paraphilias. The last chapter in the book are sexual deviancies, paraphilias, which law enforcement usually has no idea what's going on.
No.
I've been called out to cases, and they think they have this weird homicide, and you look at it, and it's a sexual asphyxia, which is an accidental death. The person did not intend to kill themselves; they were enjoying themselves, but it ended up going too far.
Yeah. Well, we're getting all those cases. I have to tell you, your history and what you've done, accomplished between your roles from driving, with an ambulance and working for a funeral home to putting together courses for college students and everywhere in between is remarkable.
Thank you. I enjoy the classes, I enjoy the interaction, and I enjoy training people.
Clearly, Larry, clearly. I'm telling you, it's absolutely remarkable going through your history and what you've done. And we haven't even gotten into the nitty of it and where you've been speaking and who you speak to and why. And it's ongoing. That's why it is so important that you come back, because there's so many places to dive in here. And how can you do it in one episode? It's impossible with you.
I'd love to come back. I tell my classes that a crime scene is like a jigsaw puzzle. You have a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle, and there are 40 pieces of firearms and 40 pieces of fingerprints and 40 pieces of bloodstain, and on and on. But if I give you 20 of each of those, you can put that puzzle together, and you may think you know what it's a picture of. But if I give you the missing 20 pieces, it'll entirely change your mind.
Could change everything.
And that's why I think it's so important to have somebody continuing the process of educating so that we have a better criminal justice system. I think we're probably the best in the world, but we do make mistakes.
Yeah, there's always room for improvement, but it's that continual education that is so it's crucial, especially when it comes to solving the puzzle. It's not, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here just to go back on a couple of things that you said. At the police academy, yes, you're getting trained to be a police officer, you're handling your gun, you're learning all of those, the legal system to a certain degree, and that whole avenue. But that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination that makes you a crime scene investigator. There is something very, very, very different, polar opposite almost, between being a police officer and being a crime scene investigator, just by the knowledge of what you're looking at and how to look at it, to even realize you're even looking at an unsolved puzzle.
It's just, I've had cases where the officers would testify for the prosecution. I work for both prosecution and defense. I consider myself a forensic scientist. Okay. I'm looking at the evidence. I'm drawing conclusions from it. I'm not pro-prosecution. I'm not pro-defense. I'll look at the material. I'll give you what I found. If you can use me in court, whichever side it's on, then bring me to court. If not, I'm fine. You're the one, as the attorney, that's in charge of that case. I'm not an attorney. I can't tell you what to do. But the more information that the jury has, I think the better conclusions they can make. I've had cases. I had a stabbing case out of Texas one time. Occurred in a mobile home, in a trailer, single wide. And the suspect was my client in this case, and she had gone out the back door. The owner of the trailer had been in the front. His body was found in the front of the car. A police officer got up and testified that there was high velocity spatter patterns on the back door. Well, high velocity spatter patterns and blood only occur from gunshot wounds and explosions or power tools. This was a simple knife stabbing. The officers don't, I'm not saying officers are bad. I'm just saying they quite often don't have the training that they really need to be a good investigator.
And that's exactly the point, that you can be a great police officer, but that doesn't make you a crime scene investigator, because what you're looking at, you don't know what you're looking at till you've been trained on how to look at it.
Exactly.
What you see, is clearly a pattern that was caused by something specific.
Yes. In Bloodstain,
and what you do know is it was not a knife. That's a whole different pattern. And something like that is how bad guys get away or good guys get wrongly convicted, just by lack of knowledge. And that's why this type of training and the actual crime scene investigator at a crime scene is so crucial.
Right. And that's the role that I'm playing now, is to educate the attorneys, because they aren't trained in this either. The officer goes out, he thinks he has enough to make an arrest, he makes the arrest, turns it over to the DA. The DA will look at it, say, oh, I think I can get a conviction out of this. He doesn't send his investigator out to do more investigating. He either accepts the case or turns it down. You know, the case is not necessarily thoroughly investigated. A lot of the cases that I've worked on, the defense attorney has done more investigation than the prosecutor.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I would definitely believe that. And obviously you love your teaching, you love what you're doing, you love helping the community, you love the investigative work. What drove you to be a crime scene investigator? From where you started to that point, did somewhere down that road of all of your experience and everything that you were learning say, this is it? Or is it a role that fell in your lap and you fell in love with it? How did you get there?
Well, I found out very early that seeing other people's blood did not bother me. Working at the mortuary, working at the ambulance, seeing my own blood is a little different. I remember one time I was playing darts with a friend, and a dart bounced off and hit me in the shin. So my mother says, well, you better go down to the doctor. So I got on my little bicycle and rode a block to the doctor's office. And he went in and, probed around and says, oh, there's nothing in there. It didn't break off, all this jazz. And I was standing at the reception, paying the bill and getting ready to leave. And I passed out because it was my own blood.
You poor thing.
But working at the table, working in an ambulance, working at the autopsy table, does not bother me. One of my early ambulance calls was a gentleman whose truck had stopped on a small, narrow 2-lane road. And he was out of the truck, and a car came flying by, hit him, and severed his arm. His arm was stuck in the windshield. She drove down the road a couple of miles and suddenly realized that arm's not going to fall off. So she stopped. The ambulance was called out from the funeral home. I started at the funeral home as a lawn boy. I was mowing yards.
You've done it all.
When they would need more people, we had an ambulance. They had, the manager, the assistant manager, and the senior yard man all did ambulance calls. But if they have 2 calls at the same time, they wouldn't have anybody during the day to run that. So we sent out the ambulance. They picked up the gentleman, rushed him to the hospital, and then they called back and said, we've got the arm. So we filled up an ice chest with ice, and I rushed over, picked up the arm, and rushed it down to the hospital. They were able to reattach it. He lived.
That's
So
I tell you, that's why we have such incredible, doctors, because that, to me, first of all, having your arm ripped off, that's horrific. Getting it stuck in a windshield, getting out of the windshield, get it from the accident to the hospital, reattach it. That's good genius. I love that we have the ability to do that.
Yeah. Science has come so far in recent, and the latest thing, the big thing is DNA. I don't know if you've been following the Utah college scene or not.
I know how that's how they caught him. I have not followed all the intricate details on what that was. Tell us.
Well, they found some blood at the crime scene, or material with DNA. They haven't specifically said, any of the reports I've seen, that it was blood, but they found some foreign DNA there. They had a description of the car. From that, they were able to develop a suspect, and then they sent the law enforcement out to his parents' home in back east, Pennsylvania, I believe it was, and followed the family there. The suspect was still in Utah, but they followed the family, and the father had discarded something, I don't know, a cigarette, a coffee cup, soda can, whatever. But because you discard it, you no longer have any legal calls
Yeah.
on that. So the police picked it up, they ran DNA off of it and sent that to a forensic investigator, DNA investigator, and she was able to run the DNA from there and determine filial DNA against the blood stain at the crime scene, or the stain at the crime scene. And that's how they developed enough to actually make their arrest.
This is why I am such a forensic fanatic, because I love how this works. Now, explain the type of DNA that you were just speaking of, because it's common knowledge to you, but there's going to be a whole bunch of people that go, what kind of DNA?
Well, when they first started, and I did the FBI training, it was a full month course back at Quantico, the FBI training lab. And the DNA we did back then took a week, at least, maybe 2 weeks to develop it. Since then, they have developed a faster method of doing it. So now you can get DNA results within 3 or 4 days. And you can get DNA off of anything with any cellular material. You know, if it's a fingernail, if there's any cells there, they can get it off of it. In hair, you need the root. Yeah. But in hair, you can also get the mitochondrial DNA. The regular DNA that you get in the blood is nuclear DNA. Mm-hmm. Mitochondrial are in all of your cells, and the DNA in those matches with your nuclear. So you can get a fingerprint. You can take a fingerprint now and process it for fingerprints, but you can also get DNA out of that fingerprint.
Yes.
That's called touch DNA. Mm-hmm. So you've got regular body fluid DNA, blood, semen, saliva, and then you have touch DNA. So a lot more, it's becoming much more difficult to be a successful bad guy.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
So the DNA they received or were able to collect from the discarded material from his father.
Yes.
That was what kind of DNA?
I don't know. They didn't say, but I had the impression it was probably mitochondrial, but they didn't say if it was, I don't think it was a blood stain. So I think it was probably, from saliva, from a fingerprint on the cup, from whatever. They didn't specify in their report, but they compare that DNA and then they have a suspect, because to make a match with DNA, you have to have a suspect. You know, they had the stain from the crime scene, but they had no suspect to compare it with and
There's
see
nothing it matches to. It's worthless.
Yeah. Right now they're doing 12 to 15 markers on DNA, and they know the percentages of the population that have each of those markers. Prior to DNA, I was in serology with state police for my 14 and a half years. We would run enzymes. We could do enzyme typing. You can do blood typing. In blood typing, you have A, B, and O. Percentages are in there. If you're a type B, 10%. So that's pretty good. But if you're a type O, you're looking at 45%. Not a very good breakdown.
Yeah.
With the DNA, they're now looking at 1 in a million, or 1 in, forever and ever. So the thing now is that the laboratories that run the DNA testing need to do constant testing on themselves to show their error rate. How good of a laboratory are you? So if a defense is looking at it, that's one of the things that they need to.
Yeah, they're looking for
because they got a DNA match. Well, is it a real DNA match, or did the crime lab screw up someplace?
Because unfortunately, they have a lot of the times messed up in one way or the other. So the checks and balances, I believe, is worth it, because at the end of the day, you're trying to either convict or let go someone who's been wrongly convicted. And that is all in the sciences. So you have to get that right.
Right. They had a homicide case, a rape homicide, I believe it was Louisiana, 10 or 15 years prior to when they developed this better DNA. and they ran it. They were looking for a black male. They ran the DNA, and it turned out it was a white person, a Caucasian.
And that's all
go back
available in
to
the
the whole new
DNA. That's what's so
investigation.
incredible about it.
Yeah.
I could just go on and on and on. So since you're talking about cases here, what case sticks with you and why?
I had a case, juvenile, and this was a case I actually worked. All of my consulting work, let me interrupt. The consulting work, I work off of crime scene photographs that law enforcement has taken. So I request all the photographs, any crime scene video, and the autopsy report, because the majority of my cases, if it's a murder, if it's a homicide, then it's significant enough to go out and hire somebody. If it's a little burglary or something, it's not worth the cost, many agencies feel. So they just do it with what they have without getting experts in there.
Mhm.
This case was the young gentleman, I think he was 17 or 18 now, his mother had taken him and moved back east because the father was abusive. He came back when he was 17 or 18. I'm not sure why. And was staying with his dad at the house. It was a rural house up on a hill. And they burned wood for heat in their house. They had an outhouse for their plumbing. So it was very rural. Friends would come by and say, well, where's Papa? Well, he's in town. Or his brother would come by and say, well, where's John? Oh, he's off doing something. So finally they got concerned enough after 3 or 4 days at least. So they called state police to investigate. They went out, the officers went out, criminal division probably, not the crime lab. And they found there was a wood pile down at the bottom of the hill. And they looked in the wood pile and they found the torso. He had been decapitated. His hands were removed. His feet were removed. His genitals were removed. So they called the crime lab out. We were looking all over. The house was small, but it was, maybe messy, but it was probably all that way. No signs of a struggle, no signs of blood, anything in there. We did find a little hacksaw, but there were lots of other tools around, so that wasn't significant. The outhouse was maybe 30 or 50 feet from the house up on the top of the hill. And I was looking around and I saw a little blood transfer on the door to the outhouse. So I got a hold of the other officers that were there and I said, we need to turn the outhouse over. In my generation, knocking over outhouses was an event around Halloween, but this was not Halloween.
No.
So we laid the outhouse over, and down in the cesspool at the bottom of the outhouse were all of these pieces. And the medical investigator was there. He just come back from a fishing trip. So luckily he had a net to bring his fish into the boat. So with his net, he was able to bring everything out, and we lined it up on a plastic sheet and photographed it. Everything was there. It was remarkable condition. It looked like your hands, if you've been doing lots of dishes, the wrinkled hands. So the skin was all wrinkled, but it was still, very recognizable in the face even. You could tell who it was. We went back a later date when it was dark. There's something called luminol, which is a chemical that we spray where we think there was blood, but we can't see it. They've cleaned it up with such a small amount, whatever. And you spray the luminol in the dark and it will glow. It will light up so you can see what you're there. So we went back and we sprayed the house, didn't find anything. Of course, it was on the outhouse, but we knew that already. We could see it. I sprayed the hill. And the
wow.
apparently had his dad outside. Whether he killed him outside, I don't know. But he had dismembered him outside with that little saw, and the blood had flowed down the hill. And we were able to document all of that. So that was a very interesting case.
That's,
Um,
yeah, that I have to say, just a couple of things to go back at the
yeah,
case. First of all, it took someone to know what to look for, that you even saw that trace blood left on the bathroom or the outhouse door to even consider going there. Most people wouldn't have even thought it. So
yeah,
that's why it's so important to get a trained eye, a trained person to look at a crime scene. So kudos to you for actually seeing that. Then my next question is, this is outside, you're seeing, you spray the yard, the grass, the mountain, whatever was there. That
mostly.
again took, you got to think to do that. And then it stayed outside. How long would that have been visible with luminol
The
outside?
oldest case that I've personally worked on was inside, with a carpet, and I was able to bring up stains that were 6 years old. So it's very long lasting.
But outside, that's remarkable to
Yeah.
see the, where it had run, where gravity had pulled it to the slowest level and was still visible. That's, I would imagine there's a lot of people at that crime scene that had their jaws wide open.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you
I did
can't,
have
you
a
can't deny
very,
what you're looking at with luminol, that's for sure. Oh gosh, if I could have, I would have loved to have been like a little bird on your shoulder, just learning from you, just following you into scenes and through your education process, because this is you're living my dream. If I'm going to come back as Larry, I want to come back as you. So now that we've, learned how long you've been doing this at various levels of career, whether it be working in the funeral home, a crime scene investigator, your all of your forensic expertise and all of that. So I have to ask, you've really seen a tremendous amount of forensic evolvement of the sciences and how it's used and how how it's changed and just grown so spectacularly over the years. What did how do you keep up with that? Does it still just blow your mind sometimes when because you're actually watching a lot of this process because you're living it?
yes. Yeah. I try and keep my trainings up. This last spring, I did a 2 hour session that I taught at the American Academy of Forensic Science that was in Seattle, Washington. And then I got to attend, well, I didn't get to, I paid, but I attended other presentations that were there. I still belong, I keep my membership up in the Southern Association of Forensic Science, the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, and the Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction. I'm a retired member of the American Academy Association, American Academy of Forensic Sciences. So I try and keep up with the training. I do a lot of watching of the cop shows on TV or in the dramas.
I was about to ask you a question on that. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, most of the cop shows are sort of one-sided. They've gotten better, but usually they won't present a case where they don't know what's going on. They're only presenting because I know what's going on and I made my arrest and there's a conviction. So you're kind of seeing one-sided of it. One of the best history kind of shows that was on is on cable. Kendall, Lieutenant Kimball, he's got 2 shows on now, but he would narrate. I don't know what he said. He had solved 300 homicides or some huge number. He was out of Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I liked his show because he would narrate what was going on, and then he had, oh, my wife said it's Kenda, Kenda. He would have actors reenacting what had happened, which he obviously had a say so in because the character that was playing his part was very young and very tall and very handsome.
Why not?
Yeah. But he'd be saying something, and he said, and then the suspect told me this, and I didn't know what the shit he was talking about. He was very honest and straightforward, rather than oh, I solved it, I'm the greatest. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was very interesting. The new CSI Las Vegas is back on. I think they're in their second season, and they are very good. The stuff that they're doing is very accurate. And it's a good one I'd recommend if you're interested in the kinds of things that forensics can do.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. That's, giving that, and I mean, I have a smidget of training compared to your career. I just have, my college degree in crime scene, forensics and investigation. But when you have so much knowledge that you have, and then you do watch these shows, I know I get frustrated because no one's walking into a crime scene like that, and that's not how they do it. So I would get really frustrated that there's this false knowledge being thrown out there on how things are collected, how crime scenes are handled, how quickly it's done. And I was wondering what your feelings were on that, but you're saying that their shows are actually getting better at it.
Well, the CSI Las Vegas is better. I'm not going to say much for the other movies that are out and everything.
Oh, yeah.
My kids, I have two kids, they're both in their 40s now. But when they were in high school, they would hate to go to a movie with me if it was any kind of a mystery movie copy thing, because I would sit there and say, they can't do that. They didn't do that, right? You can't ask them this.
I know. I watch shows like that, and that's pretty much why I watch all my crime shows by myself, because it just drives me crazy when they're doing it wrong, or they're handling evidence wrong, or not asking the right questions that would have absolutely led to possibly going down the correct path. So I am just like, because to me, like you, it's the puzzle.
Yeah. And it's very satisfying when you can present it. The jury makes a decision, and whatever decision they make is fine, as long as they've been given the information.
And the proper information.
I had a case. Do you want me to talk about more cases?
Oh, absolutely. I love cases.
I had a case out of San Diego. The gentleman, African-American, lived in the house right next door, and there was a garage. So you had a long driveway coming back, and the garage had a series of businesses, one behind the other from the street. Somebody had come in to the garage. The mechanic's garage had a garage door, and then beside it they had a person door. Inside the person door, I don't know what it's called, entry door, there was a stairway going upstairs, and then there was another door going on into the shop. The owner of the shop was leaving one night, so he'd opened the inside door, and he came from the outside door with a screwdriver and attacked him. They stabbed him on the nose, almost got his eye. So he was bleeding heavily. And he was in there fighting with this guy. And because it's a nice little boxed in area, the cast off patterns, we get into blood later, cast offs are a certain size and there's a certain characteristic to them. The cast off patterns was on the wall beside him, the dead end wall. It was on the door and the wall behind him, and even some on the stairs where he's dodging around to not be stabbed again. The suspect who was convicted for the case was walking home. He'd been out someplace all day at the beach or something, came home and was out of something, beer, went down to the corner store and was coming back, and the cops saw him walking by. There was a street light at the end of this garage area, and they had him stand under the street light and brought the victim out at his door, which was 2 buildings or 2 units back. So I don't know, 100 feet, 200 feet from, and he made a positive identification. Oh, that's the guy that did it. Was convicted on that. They brought me in. I luminoled the garage area, the stairwell, and there was blood stains all the way around, except we had what we call a shadow area where the blood was hitting the assailant rather than hitting the wall behind him.
Mm-hmm.
When they arrested the client, he had no blood on him. And I believe I was also able to look at his clothing. There was no blood on his clothing. They still had, he served, I think, 2 years before we got this retrial. and I was able to get him released. I don't know who did the crime, but there was no physical evidence that said he did that crime.
Except for a very long distance view.
Witness, and it was only one person. It was at night. He was African American, and they were under a street light.
It's okay. This is why it's the puzzle. First of all, it's very unfortunate that this gentleman was convicted and spent any time behind bars for something he did not do. I believe that for anybody who's wrongly convicted. But anybody with even half a brain could look at that crime scene and know no one's walking out of there clean. Even if you're the assailant, you're not walking out clean. I mean, and then you could very easily, oh, I could go into a whole bunch. So let's take that to step forward to your blood, your work within the forensics with the blood and spatter marks and everything that goes into that. This is what I love. People don't realize that, you were talking about high velocity earlier, a gunshot wound versus a stab wound. If blood comes off your knife as you're going up, it's not going to look the same as you're coming down. And so when you go into a crime, I'm going to get all excited here. So when you go into a crime scene, you're almost seeing the drawing, and you could tell, not probably like that, but you have such knowledge because you specialize in this. It starts to speak to you of what could have happened, may have happened, and you say that shadowing. So that should be a straight, spatter mark, but there's a gap missing.
So that blood
got in there. Someone could put up a jacket. That's a defense wound. Like there's all sorts of things that you can see with your eye. So talk about that.
Yeah, basically the old training we broke blood stains down into 3 categories of spatter stains. You had low velocity, which is just by gravity, the blood dripping off your nose with a nosebleed. That's low velocity. Medium velocity, the low velocity is about the size of your fingernail. They're large. Medium velocity is smaller, 3 to 5 millimeters, and they're basically circular, but they may also have tails on them. I tell my classes the movie Bambi. Did you see? You're close to my age group, much younger, but close. The teenagers now may not know what Bambi is. In Bambi, there's a scene in Bambi in the old Disney movie, probably in the 40s, where Bambi and his mother are standing on top of a hill, and it's raining, and you can know it's raining because you see all these little teardrop shapes coming down across the screen. Well, liquids do not travel in teardrop shapes. I mean, it's a good way to get the point across for Disney, but in a liquid, whether it's rain, water, grease, blood, whatever it might be, it travels basically in a spherical form. It's not solid. It's not like a marble. It's fluctuating, but it's spherical. When it hits something, then it changes the shape. If it's falling straight down 90 degrees, you'll get a circular pattern. If it's coming in at an angle, you'll get a tail, because that circle, when it first hits, the image of the blood is round, and that's the roundness of that circle. And then it goes out into a teardrop, which we call a tail. The tail shows you the direction in which that drop was traveling when it hit that wall. You can do the same thing with a sidewalk. If somebody's injured and dripping blood, I can tell you, were they walking from the left to the right or the right to the left by looking at the drops.
And you could also, to some degree, tell how fast they were walking. The drops will also show you speed.
Yes, yeah. There'll be distance in them, and the longer, thinner the tail, the faster the speed they're going. I do a workshop where I present. I've done this for a number of different agencies and for my classes. I set up 5 different scenes in a large room. They're real blood. They're on paper, and then they're laminated, so it's safe behind plastic. And they're given a quick scenario of each of these 5 scenes. This is what happened. Now you're Officer Donut. You're the first one there. Does this match with what you're seeing? What do you think happened here? And it's amazing what they think originally. And I break them up into groups. So there's not more than 7 or 8 in a group so that everybody is involved. They get around to go through all 5 scenes. Then we come back and they give me their results on what they think happened. And they will be varied. The groups, I think that, oh no, I think this happened. Then I give them a hour lecture on what bloodstains can do for you. And then they're allowed to go back to those scenes again and see, they're testing and they get to see what they've learned, which I think I'm a great hands-on kind of
I was
person.
going to say that's why it's so hands-on.
Yeah, if I can do it, I remember it. If I read it in a book or listen to somebody say it, yeah.
Yeah, if I do something, touch, feel, sights, any of those senses, it's embedded.
Yeah. In fact, I'm working with a friend of mine right now. She's an author. She's doing a book. Our working title is Follow the Bodies. It's basically my history, sort of like what we went over this morning, a lot more detail. We haven't found a publisher yet, but that's her job.
Oh, I got to hear all about when that's all ready to go. I'm buying it.
Okay, I'll let you know.
I'm buying it. I can say I know this guy, but I would like it autographed.
Yeah. The medium velocity spatters typically are when you hit something, if there's blood on a surface and you hit it with another surface, it's squeezed out. And those stains are medium velocity in size, and they'll have a specific pattern to them. You also, with medium velocity, you'll get cast-offs. If I have a knife and I stand, or a beer bottle, and I hit you and I swing up, the first time I hit you, there is no spattering because there's no blood source. I'm creating the blood source with the first blow. Then if I hit you again where the blood is, you will get spattering out. And if there's enough blood on the object, when I swing it up, the blood will come flying off. And when I swing it down, the blood will come flying off. We have cast off scenes. I can tell you which hand the assailant was holding that weapon. I can't tell you which handed he is, but typically, if you're attacking somebody, use your strongest hand. But I've had a case where his right hand during the scuffle had become injured. So he was using his left hand. But that was no excuse because now his left hand had become his dominant hand. Your high velocity, the drops are very small, 1 millimeter or less in size, generally, the total population. With gunshots, which is the most common ones that we run into, for the bullet leaving the gun, it hits the surface and goes in, and there's blood. Some of that blood is coming back out toward the gun. That's what we call backspatter. The bullet goes through the brain, the bone, on out, the exit wound. The bullet makes a hole, and now the forward spatter goes on out. Backspatter typically goes 2 to 3 feet. Forward spatter will go up to 48 inches. So in looking at a body, if you've got stippling, which are little burned marks that don't wipe off, you take a wet paper towel at the autopsy and wipe across the smudging, which is the black ring from the gun barrel, and that will wipe off. But all these little dots, because that's where the gunpowder actually burned into the skin. If you're within that close distance, that's important for prosecution and defense. How far away was the person when they shot somebody? If you're within 3 inches when you fire that gun, you'll get backspatter, not only on the gun. If you're 2.5 feet, you can get it on the gun, on your hand. Yep. But if you're 3 inches or less, you get it inside of the barrel. And that's one of the things I look at is I'll take a Q-tip. I have a lens, a light that goes inside, and I look from the barrel in. You'll have gunshot powder residue in there. But if you have any blood stains in there, you can take a Q-tip and go in at measured distance. I go in at 3, 6, 9 centimeters, and then I test it with a presumptive for blood. I prefer phenolphthalein, but there are others out there too. And that way I can say, yes, the gun was within 3 inches when he was shot. If the defense is, we were struggling over the gun and it went off, the physical evidence confirms that story. If he says, I was 3 feet away from him, 4 feet away from him and shot him, it does not confirm it.
That's the science.
Yeah. And because it's basically a round hole, it comes out as a cone and leaves as a cone. So it's a conical pattern.
Okay.
If I'm close to you, I would get it on me. If I'm in a room, it will come out, and then by gravity, it slowly gets pulled to the ground.
Mhm.
And because high velocity spatter is so small, unless you really get down, and particularly if you're on a carpet,
Yeah.
unless you get down there and look very closely on your hands and knees, the general officer would not even see that. So he doesn't know where the victim was actually standing when the bullets went in.
Yeah, just because they're there does not mean that's actually where it took place.
Right. Yeah. The power tools, depending on the tool, like a chainsaw, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If you've ever used a chainsaw, the wood chips are going out and back. They're not going all over. They're not conical. They're in a line. You'll have a section, if you're cutting tissue with blood, you'll have a section in the very middle that is solid blood. But then on each side of it, you'll have an area that is smaller drops. So you can identify it there. An explosion is, again, high velocity, but it's very different. If I threw a hand grenade down and you jumped on top of it to save me, which I would hope you do, the host, the blood is all over the room. You know, it's not conical, it's not in a line, it's everywhere. So it's easy, well, not always easy, but the characteristics are there, and you can determine what the instrument was that was used. You can also go into a crime scene, and if you've got stains on the wall, you can make some conclusions on where that person was injured. The bloodstain patterns from the wound will show up at a height. If I'm 5'11", if you've got spatter on the wall that's a high velocity spatter, at 5'8", then I was standing up. But if I'm 3 feet off the floor and it's a medium velocity, you're beating me with something. You were down there and you were hit, laying on the floor and you were hit. You can determine locations based on that.
Yeah, trajectory, all of that is shown in those spatter marks, and multiple weapons being used.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And you can look at stains, like stains on a wall, and say, okay, it's high velocity. And it's, well, it could be, she could be standing up. She could be a short person because the body's gone. But you look for other stains in there besides blood stains. If you get hair, longer hair, it's from the head. If you get tissue, brain tissue basically looks like yogurt. It's a pale white with a little pink maybe to it. It's definitely from the brain. So, if you've got that kind of a scene and no body, well, is that person capable of, was it just a fight and they went home, put a Band-Aid on? No, you're looking at a body that was hid someplace.
Oh, I could just listen to you for hours. But what part of being a crime scene investigator and going out to these cases drew you to want to, really look in the forensics and study and get certified in that area?
I enjoy the crime scenes. And I went to the State Police Crime Lab in 1980, I believe it was. It was after the New Mexico prison riot, because I was still with the medical examiner's office when that went down, when I worked at. So I was with the state police, and we'd do crime scenes. We'd have some in-house trainings, but I applied for training wherever and whenever I could. I'm just a career student, I guess. Because you always learn. Yeah.
That I find it fascinating. I know to some people it's gruesome and they can't even look at it, but to me, I don't, and I don't want to say like I have zero emotion or whatever. I know somebody was horrifically injured or died, and that's terrible. With that said, looking at a crime and seeing spatter and just everything a crime scene leaves behind, I don't necessarily see the tragedy as much as I just see a puzzle and I just want to solve it.
Exactly.
It's not as if I'm heartless. It's just I see it differently.
Yeah. You know, I see it and I want to know, well, what happened, like you say. And, you know, most law enforcement, they don't care what happened. They just want to make their arrest because their sergeant's saying, get back out there and do traffic tickets.
Yeah.
You know, so the more I know that I can put together and tell anybody that wants to listen, you know, I just think that's great. I had a case, another case. I don't know what your time frame is. We're probably over
Go
already.
for it.
You can edit me out. I had a case in Phoenix where the police officer was a witness to the crime. Have you ever been to Phoenix,
No.
Arizona? They have very wide medians instead of, you know, 4 or 5 feet. They're 12, 15 feet. I don't know. And they have trees and shrubs and everything growing in them. The police officer was pulling in across the street. It was one of these divided streets with a median, pulling into the stop and route, 7-Eleven, Allsup's, whatever you call it. And he looked across the street and he saw these two guys out there in the middle of the median, and he couldn't see, you know, because there were tall bushes 3 or 4 feet. He saw the one guy had a 2x4 and he was swinging it down, you know, against the ground. And he hit the siren or yelled at him or something and went over, and they both took off running. One guy, let's say, had on a black shirt that had a 2x4, and the other guy had on a white shirt. They chased them both. We got over there, and there was a body laying there, and there was a broken piece of 2x4, about 1.5 to 2 feet long. He chased him, and the black shirt was carrying the 2x4, and he dropped it, and they kept going. He caught both of them.
Good for him.
Because he was the witness. He saw the assault take place. He saw the black shirt beating this guy with the 2x4 and killing him. They went to trial. I looked at the clothing, the pants that the black shirt had on. Remember, there's a broken 2x4 laying there at the crime scene. His pants, if you look at legs, you have a seam out here and a seam inside.
Mm-hmm.
So on his right leg, the stains were not in front of his leg, but on the outside of his leg. On his left leg, the stains were on the inside of his leg. They were all medium velocity impact spatters. If you're going to kill somebody, if you're going to hit them with something, if you're not using a hammer or a hatchet or something with any length, how are you going to hold that and hit them? Are you going to go like this? Or are you going to go like this?
Mm-hmm.
To get the stains on his pants and the location that they were on, he was not standing behind the 2x4 when it caused the blood to spatter. He was standing to the side of the 2x4. So the other guy or somebody else was hitting him with this 2x4, and the blood was spattering out to the side and ended up on his pant legs. We were able to get an acquittal on the black shirt. They never even charged the white shirt after that. Just let the case drop.
That's unbelievable. And there's a victim that has a family.
Oh, yeah. Well, these were
Unsolved.
the white shirt and the victim were both homeless, and the black shirt apparently had a place to stay, but he was sometimes homeless and sometimes not homeless or something.
So to them, they weren't important enough to investigate it any further.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell all of my attorneys, you need to do victimology. Find out the relationship of the two parties. Find out what their background is. You know, do they have a violent record? Have they been charged with killing somebody else before? Do they have no record at all? You know, all of the things are important. And what's their relationship to the victim? The case in Utah right now, they haven't released anything yet that he knew the 4 students. They've said his car or one similar has been in that area for, I don't know, a couple of weeks been seen, but they haven't released anything where they've tied him. Why did he pick these 4 people and not the other 2 people that were in the same apartment?
And multiple.
Yeah.
That's high risk.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very curious to see how this all goes down, because there's still so many question marks. I think it's fantastic that DNA has linked him, and that's getting closer. But to just go in and murder a bunch of people
That you don't know.
that you don't know. Now, we've seen serial murderers in the
Mhm.
past actually do this type of thing.
But usually not
Wonder
serial.
if there's somebody
multiple.
else out there
Yeah.
that he was able to do this on he was able to kill multiple people in one location and be very efficient at it, that it has taken this long to apprehend him.
Mm-hmm.
That would be amazing if this was his first at bat.
Oh, yeah.
That would be my 2 cents right there.
Yeah. And I'd be interested in what they got at the crime scene that had his DNA. Was it something that somebody else could have planted there? That's always a possibility.
It's very much a possibility.
Yeah.
Planting fingerprints is not difficult. Planting blood is not difficult. Planting DNA, whether it be semen or, that is not difficult.
Yeah. And all those things, other than DNA now is the prime solver of the crime. They used to say fingerprints were. Well, they've had cases with fingerprints that have turned out to be identical. They had a case of an attorney in, I think it was either Washington or Oregon State, who had never been to Spain. And they had a killing in a subway. Do you remember that?
What you're talking about?
Yeah. And they tracked it down. They submitted his fingerprints because he was an attorney. He was printed, and they tracked him down. They arrested him. The defense expert had also looked at those fingerprints because they're a partial fingerprint.
Mhm.
And it's only, one finger, not the whole hand and 10 fingers. But his defense attorney says, everything I'm seeing, yeah, it looks like it's a match.
I believe it was even peer reviewed as a match.
Yeah.
And it was very much not.
Yeah. They eventually, I think they even solved it finally. They arrested a known terrorist and checked his fingerprints, and those were his.
They were saying, well, it's a
my back here was
12 point, whatever point. They had so many people putting their careers on the line to say that this gentleman had a positive ID through his fingerprint, and it was never him. It was never even close to a match, which leads to the question I was going to ask. You being an investigator, also that you've testified throughout the United States in cases, have you ever been pressured? Because there's pressure to solve cases from higher ups. So have you ever been pressured to not follow what the forensic facts actually show you to convict somebody because they just want it out of the news?
No. I'm a forensic scientist, and I tell them that when I start on a case. I will tell you what I find.
Good.
If it hurts you, too bad. If it helps you, great. But no, I will not let them pressure me. There have been cases that I've worked on, and I'm sure the other side had been put under pressure because the person that did that exam did not show up to court. Her supervisor was the one that showed up to court and testified as to her findings. Why didn't the person that did the work come in and testify?
That throws up a flag right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does he,
And all the countries have different.
You could give an overview, just as if you read a book, you could give an overview. But that doesn't, there's so many minute details in that can be questioned that he would have no knowledge of.
Exactly.
I don't even know how that could possibly be allowed.
But whatever the judge allows.
But, I guess if they want to solve the case, they'll find a way, even if it's, providing wrong evidence, evidence collected inappropriately, or just the pressure, as if, these other fingerprint analysis that was done on that one attorney to say more than one time by more than one professional, that is a match, and it was not a match.
Yeah. Well, they really shouldn't say, and I don't think they're saying that anymore, that it's a match. They'll say it's consistent with, because unless you have, a 10 print card with the palms, you don't know if it's a match or not.
Yeah. And I loved going through the fingerprint training. I don't know how to describe it. It was, when you find those, you do those puzzles, what's missing? Like you've got two images, and you have to find the 7 things that are different.
Yeah.
To me, they scream, they come off the paper. I can just see right through it. And fingerprints, to me, when you're doing a comparison, by no means am I saying I'm a professional at it, but they scream at you when they're not. It's just there. I don't know how to describe it. So I love doing it because it was just like I could pick out the minutia of a fingerprint, but like that's not it. That's not it. I can see it. I loved doing that.
Science should not convict. It should be used to convict. But you can get all the science you want, but still you need investigation to fill in the blanks, to be sure you have the right person.
Yeah, because DNA at a crime scene doesn't mean that you did it.
No.
So you have to have the whole story, and it has to make sense.
Yeah. We had a case here in New Mexico, was a rape case, and the fingerprint was found on the light bulb outside. They had unscrewed it so they wouldn't be seen trying to get in. And, their defense was, oh no, I put in a new light bulb or something. I had another case where the person was moving in and her headboard, mirror wouldn't be a headboard, on the dresser, the mirror on the dresser was sitting there on the side of the street while she was unpacking everything. And the defense was, well, he'd walk by when all that stuff was out there and he just happened to, touch the mirror. He had an alibi for it. Wasn't necessarily a very good alibi, but at least he had one.
Yeah. I love the science. And again, I could listen to your cases. I could listen to everything you said just for hours and hours and hours. I just think you're so spectacular. I'm so glad you're coming back on, because I feel like in order to get this all through, we have to do multiple interviews, or people will have to listen to us for probably about 5, 6, 7 hours. Because I would love to talk more and just get more in depth on the crime scene, and then do a separate on blood spatter, and then just really, really dig into it. I hope you're willing to do that with me.
Oh yeah, I'm more than open to it. Well, if you want to read something interesting, get a hold of the latest edition of AARP. They had, how many old women were killed in Dallas? Oh, my wife says about 24. They were all elderly, wealthy females, one male, and they lived in retirement homes. And they would suddenly show up dead, and they would mark them as natural causes because they're in their 80s, 90s. And it turned out they finally caught this one guy he would steal their jewelry. He'd kill them and steal all their jewelry. And the cops never associated it. When they did put out warnings that, we got somebody doing this, the retirement homes wouldn't release it because it would be bad publicity for them. Their clients might move out.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And that's why they stay on the streets and kill even more.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it today. Hopefully I gave you something you can use and Wasn't too
Yes, it's been
outwinded and
absolute.
stuck on you too often.
It's just been a pleasure talking with you, learning more, just hearing you talk about cases, your experience. I'm really looking forward to doing this again with you.
Good. Well, thank you. And congratulations on your wedding. Where's the honeymoon? Do you know yet?
Blackberry Farms in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're excited. That's
Good.
where I am. I'm here in Knoxville, so it's right
Yeah.
down there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
good. Have a good time. Take
Thank
a
you.
week off.
Yeah, I'm going to need it. But thank you very, very much for being with us.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.